Rosa Corey. You can get that on Amazon, and I know that a lot of people, especially people who've coming to the meetings, have been watching that. All right, so the backup stream is up and running on the New Zealand Public Party page. If any of my admins, I've got Amos in the chat there, if you want to run across to the New Zealand Public Party page and share that link in this main Vinny Eastwood page, because we want to get the subscribers up for that one. With that being said, let's start the show. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinny Eastwood Show. I'm not a credible journalist. I'm an incredible journalist. And my very special guest is Dr. Kevin Barrett from truthjihad.com. Kevin, welcome to the program.
Hey, it's great to be back with you, Vinny.
I get that a lot. Now, the thing we wanted to be talking about today is the Advance New Zealand Public Party, and basically this is the first political, should I say, example that I've ever seen where it openly talks about Agenda 21, the New World Order, and all of the various conspiracies that we've been called nuts for mentioning for the last decade that we've been involved, or at least that I've been involved. Perhaps you've been doing this a bit longer and suffered even more abuse than most. So, Kevin, I was wondering if you would be able to give your first impressions of the party, if you've done any background, and if not, we'll just get straight on into the interview.
Well, yes, I looked at the website. It's great. And it's also great that the mainstream media is starting to look sort of worried. Like, what is this? There's this new political party with, conspiracy theorist leaders, and maybe this needs to be nipped in the bud. Look what happened in Germany. 20,000 people in the streets protesting COVID tyranny. You've got to stop this before it spreads. So the more they panic, the more that means there's really something good there. And I like the website. I think it's fantastic. And, if I were going to be offering advice, the only two things I would add is add some specific, practical, positive thinking program, such as public banking or a Henry George single tax, or both. I mean, I would lead with those two things. So you can be a constructive conspiracy theorist with ideas that are actually better and more practical than anything the mainstream is allowed to talk about.
I think you're correct, and that's the reason why I've done the show this way. When NZPP took me on to help them out, they just wanted to pay me to do one show a week for them, and I said, no. The country's at stake. I've been in this game for over a decade. I've got contacts with some of the greatest minds in this world that know this material back and forth, and I believe that if this country is going to get itself out of the chains of the New World Order, it's going to take an international advisory team of some of the greatest minds in this world. And Kevin, you're on top of the list.
Well, thank you, Vinny. I'm happy to be part of the great international conspiracy to liberate New Zealand.
That's what we aim to do. Now, the question on everybody's minds as well is what is happening with current events? I mean, internationally, how is New Zealand shaping up as an example? Because I think the reason why I started my show so long ago is by watching conspiracy people like Alex Jones and David Icke, and then recognising after listening to New Zealand activists at protests and interviewing them for a couple of hours that almost every single thing that is happening overseas is either happening here or it's coming here.
Yeah, we get this impression of New Zealand as a kind of a happy hideaway for lucky Kiwis who don't have to face any of the terrible things going on in the rest of the world. And we all sort of imagine someday, if things get bad enough, wherever we may be, maybe we could flee to New Zealand. I mean, and I guess billionaires do that on their Learjet sometimes. When COVID started breaking out, I understand there was a Learjet deluge in New Zealand. But the thing is that I think, talking to you and various other people who actually have to live there, it turns out that New Zealand is not this valley of the hobbits. Like in Lord of the Rings, we all saw that was filmed in New Zealand, and we always think of New Zealand as being a really innocent, safe, nice place like the land of the hobbits. And the Mordor is over somewhere else, and we could flee Mordor and go to New Zealand and live with the hobbits. That's honestly how a lot of people elsewhere think of New Zealand. But the more I learn about New Zealand, the more I see it's just like pretty much everywhere else, that you've got the same problems that we have. But maybe you can wake people up there first. I mean, somebody's got to be first, right?
Yeah, and we are first to the light. So the international dateline, we are the first ones to see every new day, especially in Gisborne, New Zealand. And I think it's fitting that the country that is first to the light will be the first to vanquish the darkness.
Well, inshallah is all I can say. God, if God so wills. No, that's very exciting, really. I haven't seen this professional-looking and really, high potential kind of party that's willing to take on these red pill issues anywhere else, really, that I can think of. We had Cynthia McKinney here for a while in the U.S. Congress, and here and there you get a hit and miss person like Jesse Ventura. There have been a few people like that elsewhere in the world.
Well, let's not forget Ron Paul.
And Ron Paul, right. Actually, the Ron Paul movement was maybe the best thing going for a while, and they had to steal the election from him the way they've stolen it from others. But since then, I think the Ron Paul movement, it's kind of dwindled here, and now we have this weird sort of ethnic nationalism and divide and conquer operations, the black versus white kind of things, and we've got the COVID divide and conquer operation. So it's all really looking fairly grim, but also it's so volatile that anything could happen. And so seeing this political party emerging in New Zealand is really cool. I mean, you just never know how far that could go.
It's a measure of encouragement, and people don't know that the word encourage means to give courage to others. And my hope, and I scarcely used the word hope. I hadn't actually felt it before until I saw this movement come along, right? And I was just like, what is that warm feeling in my heart? What is that? It took me about 2 weeks to identify what it was. It was hope, Kevin. Actual, real, genuine hope. And for a genuinely cynical, jaded journalist as myself, who's seen so much and vicariously lived through so many of my guests' pain, that's an extraordinarily unlikely event.
Well, hope is, I've experienced hope on and off since I've been in the red pill world, but not much regarding the political system, the pull the lever on the voting machines thing. I have never voted for a mainstream presidential candidate in my life. And looking back, sometimes I think maybe I should have voted for Jimmy Carter, because he was actually a real Christian. He was not a bad person, and he was very bright. And he didn't have a very successful presidency because of those things. But I didn't vote for him. I wrote in Bonzo for president. It was Carter versus Reagan, and Reagan had starred in a film with Bonzo the Chimp, and I figured Bonzo would be better than either major party candidate. And so since then, I've been either staying away from elections or writing in third-party candidates or writing in whatever, and that's certainly not going to change this year in the U.S. And so hope and the electoral system and the big political parties, no, that doesn't go together for me at all most of the time. And when it occasionally does, Ron Paul comes along, or even Bernie Sanders, Cynthia McKinney, people who are a cut above the norm. They have a way of destroying people's hopes, and that's been what we've seen over and over here in the United States. But I guess you just, if you want to make the political system work, it's like anything else. You just have to work really, really, really hard at it. And if enough people do that, and we try it everywhere, so at some point it might work somewhere. Why not New Zealand?
Well, that's the concept here, is because we're a much smaller country, but we have about 1 million expats abroad, and that's been the interesting thing for me that I've never seen before, is people from overseas suddenly being interested in the politics of their home country. I mean, I recall having conversations with many people over the last decade or so about politics, and them saying, if Labour wins, I'm going to leave this country, or if National wins, I'm going to leave this country, and they're the Democrat-Republican equivalents here. And sure enough, those people did leave the country, and sure enough, they never showed any interest in New Zealand politics until now, because I believe until now there has never been even the appearance of a genuine alternative that stood any chance of victory.
Well, that's so interesting, and you have a parliamentary system there, which actually I think makes it easier to get something like this going. Here in the U.S., the system is really, really rigged against anybody other than the two major parties. It's hard to overstate how virtually impossible it is to get a third party going under the system as we have it now. But in parliamentary systems, as I understand it, because of the coalitions and things like that, people are much more willing to look at different parties, and so that I think is a huge advantage for you.
Well, can I ask you a question then? Based upon your political experience, do you believe that there's even hope for the United States to elect any kind of genuine candidate, or have the tentacles of the New World Order simply strangled it so much?
Well, the one-word answer would be it's strangled. Strangled is a good word. It's really sad. It's I've just watched things go from terrible, which was when I woke up, to what was going on politically in the United States. I was in 10th grade, I think. Maybe 16 years old or so, 15 years old, and I saw Mark Lane give a talk about the JFK assassination. I looked into that and said, "Oh my goodness, we've got a terrible problem here. A really, really ugly coup d'etat happened, and nobody is allowed to talk about it, and the whole media is locked down." So I saw that from age 15 back in 1970, whatever it was, the early to mid 70s. And it hasn't gotten better since then. And there's been, if anything, it's actually gotten worse, as the kind of forces that killed Kennedy, which are kind of a gangster elite, have really locked down their control of the whole country. And nobody challenges them. So now, really what we have is a contest between two parties of the billionaire gangster elite. And whenever even a slightly alternative voice arises, like let's say Bernie Sanders, they'll find a way to stop him. And they'll rig the voting machines. I was just speaking with Dr. Jonathan Simon, election expert on that. And we have nothing but black box voting machines here, almost all owned by organized crime-linked Republican Party honchos. And every election since those machines started in 2003, whenever there's been the slightest opportunity to shift votes, the votes have magically just shifted. And so the exit polls no longer reflect reality the way they used to. Prior to the black box machines, all the exit polls almost perfectly mirrored the actual vote counts. And now that the program black box machines are just making up whatever the programmer wants them to make up, there is this, what they call a red shift. And so in swing states, Trump versus Hillary, it's very likely that Hillary actually won those states. Not that she would have been any better than Trump. Maybe she would have been worse. But just the fact is that somebody wanted to put Trump in, and that somebody was able to get control of the software. And the same has been true for a lot of other presidential elections as well. So it really is a completely rigged game here in terms of elections. And when an honest guy like Bob Bowman runs for Congress, Bob Bowman was a Caltech rocket science PhD, flew 100 combat missions in Vietnam and later came to regret that. He was the head of the Star Wars missile defense program under 2 U.S. presidents, and he resigned as a whistleblower, became a 9/11 truth advocate, ran for Congress. He won, but the rigged voting machine said he lost by a couple of points. And he said, well, that was it. I'm not going to run anymore. And unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. This is the kind of thing that we're up against here. And, Senator Paul Wellstone wants to look into 9/11. And so his plane goes down. His wife, his daughter, and his campaign chiefs all die. And the whole media lies about the conditions. I mean, this is what we have here in the United States. So it's very discouraging.
Just in very recent, I think it was like last week, there were 2 Chinese whistleblowers who were going to go down to Wellington. They drove down to give evidence about the communist Chinese infiltration of the New Zealand political system. They didn't make it.
Really? Well, organized crime has its MO, and it's pretty much the same everywhere. And that issue of Chinese money is very interesting. I know some folks in Australia as well who are concerned about that. Peter Myers he comes on my radio show sometimes and talks about that. So yeah, in your part of the world, suddenly it's not just the U.S. NATO empire that you have to worry about, and that's actually new and in some ways refreshing, and in other ways maybe not so much, huh?
I do think that there's a massive entanglement at the moment, and my instinct tells me that this election, if Billy gets any more popular than he currently is, it's already started to turn ugly, but it's going to get a lot uglier.
So tell me about Billy. He looks really interesting. The mainstream calls him a charismatic blues guitarist and conspiracy theorist. I mean, that sounds like the kind of guy I'd like to vote for. Well,
and that's precisely why I'm going to vote for him, and that kind of thing. And the first impression that you get of the guy is, well, I like this guy. I'd like to have a beer with him, or something of that nature, which is essentially what you want. You want a real human being. Like the Trump phenomenon has essentially laid the groundwork here, and I'm not necessarily a Trump supporter, even at the best of times. But what I think the Trump phenomenon really illustrated is an undercurrent of anti-establishment sentiment, not just in the United States, but globally. And I think that after that happened, globally, people were starting to look for a Trump in their own back garden. And it didn't necessarily have to be a billionaire or some kind of narcissistic psychopath, but they wanted somebody who reflected their views that they'd been telling their families and their friends and their community about for so long and been laughed at and called conspiracy theorists, right? They simply wanted somebody out there to say, actually, you were right this whole time. Everybody else was wrong.
Indeed. Trump actually got a lot of support because the mainstream media called him a conspiracy theorist, and even people who didn't necessarily buy into his particular conspiracy theories, things like the birther thing about Obama, which may or may not be true, I don't know, but it's not really at the top of the list of the important and true conspiracy theories. And Trump talked about 9/11 when it happened in ways that deviated from the norm. He talked about his opponent Ted Cruz, I think it was, who had I think it was Cruz who had somebody in his family, his father or something, involved in the JFK assassination. Basically, Trump let it be known that he had his doubts about the JFK assassination, 9/11, and various other things. Some of them, being pretty ones that even I would say are a little goofy. Trump is not your brightest bulb in the conspiracy theory pack, but he's he was different enough that it was a lot of people found that refreshing. So, look, Vinny, if we could elect a psychopathic scumbag conspiracy theorist as president, I mean, why couldn't you elect a likable, decent, principled conspiracy theorist?
I see no reason why not. And to give context to this, I think you're also familiar with this, is that the term conspiracy theorist in the modern lexicon was indeed a creation of the Central Intelligence Agency as a response to those who were questioning the findings of the Warren Commission, and that was declassified not too long ago. Could you speak to that?
Absolutely. And once people learn that, then they often realize that the epithet conspiracy theorist is really a lot more positive than negative. Now, it's true that not every so-called conspiracy theory is true, but it's also true that conspiracy is the most common charge brought by federal courts against people here in the United States. So conspiracies exist. It simply means a group of people planning an illegal or maybe immoral act. And obviously, we don't catch everybody. Not everybody who does such a thing goes to prison. Extremely wealthy people who have spent their lives learning how to engage in criminal acts in such a way as to not be caught are not usually caught. And those of us who face that fact, who understand that even low-level, stupid criminals who don't plan ahead usually get away with each individual crime. The actual rate of clearing crimes is very low for almost all kinds of crimes. So obviously, the serious, powerful, smart, criminals working with other serious, powerful, smart criminals usually get away with their crimes. They don't go to prison, and those crimes are never prosecuted, and they don't get guilty verdicts. And so when we talk about those crimes, and we can figure out they happened pretty much in broad outlines, that's what the mainstream media calls conspiracy theory. But let's face it, it's just reality. It's just like the people who talked about the fact that JFK was obviously killed in a coup d'etat. That's just reality. Anybody who denies that at this stage in history is basically willfully ignorant.
That's right. And I like to state something, repeatedly, is that reality doesn't care what we think. It doesn't care what we believe. It is what it is, no matter how comfortable or uncomfortable it appears to be. And when you were talking about that, about high-level conspirators getting away with it, one name came to my mind: Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. Bush, who was prosecuted under the Trading with the Enemy Act for financing and ensuring resources were sent to Nazi Germany. And it's claimed that without his support and the banking cartel that he was involved with at the time, World War II would have been over years earlier.
Indeed. The J.P. Morgan banking cartel, which many say is the U.S. face of the Rothschild cartel, it is alleged that Morgan himself actually owned a minor portion, and his European banker masters owned the larger portion. Well, that cartel was, one of the biggest in the United States, and these big banking cartels, which are global, based in Europe, because Europe has ruled much of the world for a couple of centuries. They orchestrated the world wars, played both sides. They make tremendous amounts of money off war, because when governments go into debt, they have to borrow from the big bankers at compound interest. Now, you do a little exponential math on compound interest, and you see that compound interest inevitably sucks up all the wealth of the system. If you invest a dime at the time of Jesus, and you get compound interest, even a relatively low rate of only, say, 5% or something, it ends up that by today you'll own the entire galaxy, if not the known universe, because it's mathematically such that this exponential growth in money cannot keep up with reality. Reality doesn't grow exponentially. Real wealth doesn't grow exponentially. So the banksters have this racket that it's sort of like being the house in Las Vegas. Other people might win some, might lose some. They ultimately, anything they win, they're going to eventually lose. But the banksters, the house, just keeps raking it in, getting bigger and bigger compared to all the players. And that's what the central banking cartel has done. And so Prescott Bush was an operator for this banking cartel, working with the Morgan family, among others. And his job was to be a liaison with Hitler and the Nazis. And so he financed them and had a license to do it, because the U.S. government couldn't go after him effectively, because the U.S. government is just a front, essentially, for these big international crime families. And that's who still runs the world, the descendants of those same crime families. And so I certainly am praying for success in this effort to liberate New Zealand from those crime families. And again, I would urge that the party really should be thinking about proposing a public banking system. Look at the work of people like Ellen Brown and other rogue economists who have really laid it out how this works, and it's got a track record. There's a public bank even here in North Dakota, transparent public banking, issuing currency directly rather than having your government have to borrow its money at compound, exponentially increasing interest from the international banksters. I mean, this is really the bottom line. This is the basic issue, and it works better to have public banking. Your economy will work better if you do that. The only problem is you'll have the banksters coming after you. So, you might want to hire some security before you do that.
We have hired security, and I want to say we, I'm not involved in that part of it, but Billy is protected by a security detail. He actually had to move out of his farm and move his family out as well, because it was just too risky being out in the womp-womps. And I think also, when we talk about the banking cartels and things of that nature, many New Zealanders are unaware that New Zealand was mentioned close to 66,000 times in the Panama paper leaks. Now, those who may be familiar with the Cayman Islands, they'll hear the Cayman Islands referenced in movies and things of that nature. Think of it, a former British banking colony currently run by organised crime involved with huge amounts of offshore money laundering. What do you think New Zealand is, ladies and gentlemen? Okay.
I really thought it was the Shire. I thought it was the home of the happy hobbits, but it sounds like Mordor got its tentacles in there. That really doesn't surprise me so much because, as I say, I've interviewed people from New Zealand, and including you, Vinny, over the years, and so it's the whole Anglosphere is really pretty much equally corrupt. Canada, the U.S., the U.K., none of them are clean. Australia, New Zealand, the whole English-speaking world is really. And it's all part of the Five Eyes system. They're all, it's run with the same dictatorial Orwellian means by the same police agencies answering to the same international banksters. But if you can actually liberate it, it's going to be interesting. I know if the international powers that be don't like something going on in a place like New Zealand or Australia, they will, they'll try to find some way to stop it. Because I actually saw this firsthand, though I didn't realize it at the time. When I toured the world with my father. My father was an Olympic gold medalist in sailboat racing, and he worked for a sail-making company, and he got invited by the Australian government to tour Australia to speak about sailboat racing at places like the Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron. So I got to go with him. I took a semester off of high school and traveled with him through Australia. And we stayed with some very wealthy people because they're the people that buy sailboat sails and big sailboats. And so I was there in I think it was 1974. And that was the year that Jeff Whitlam was overthrown. Jeff Whitlam was a Labor prime minister who displeased the CIA, displeased the international bankers. So they set up a coup d'etat. They did all kinds of dirty tricks to make him unpopular. And then they had the Governor General, who was appointed by the Queen, not elected by anybody in Australia, dismiss the government. And so it was essentially a coup. And the big reason for it was that Whitlam wanted to close the CIA base at Alice Springs. So I was there, and I was actually, talking to some of these rich people who were in on it at the time. I didn't really realize it, but they were sort of making reference to the fact that Whitlam was on his way out. He was going to be, tossed out on his rear end. So later, a few years later, when I started waking up more politically, I looked back on that and said, "Wow, so this is cautionary tale. As you try to liberate New Zealand, you're gonna have to be what did Jesus say? You have to be as gentle as doves and as wise as serpents."
That's right, and this is a debate that I'm having with myself at the moment about the concept of the monarchy. Do we want an unelected hereditary dictatorship of potential... I don't know about the accusations towards the royal family. There's been many accusations about large-scale pedophilia and involvement within the banking system, or they dissolve the Parliament of Canada as well, that kind of thing. Should New Zealand still remain a constitutional monarchy? And my question is there any real constitution if you've got a hereditary dictatorship?
Well, I'm not a New Zealander, so I don't get to vote on that. But if I did, I would follow the founding fathers of the United States. Not that I would follow them in everything, but I would follow them in saying, let's have a divorce from the monarchy. No, I don't. Why should New Zealand be living under the British monarchy? No, I've heard people make arguments to the contrary. People like my friend and colleague, Professor Anthony Hall of the University of Lethbridge, who is very much of the opinion that the founding fathers of the U.S. were a bunch of genocidal scumbags who hated the merciless Indian savages, as they called them in their Declaration of Independence, and that the British Crown was actually kinder and gentler. So that's Tony's opinion, and there's some truth to that. But that doesn't mean that forever and ever everybody has to necessarily allow themselves to be ruled by the Queen. Canada can if they want to, and Australia and New Zealand can if they want to. But if I lived there, I think I would just want some kind of genuine sovereignty, right? I mean, why? And the thing I like, one of the many things I like about this public party is the call for sovereignty, and sovereignty above and below too. So that they can't tunnel under you or send satellites over you. So that desire for for sovereignty is just a basic human need for freedom and control over one's own destiny. And I would think that New Zealand would have more of that if it were indeed sovereign.
Well, at the moment, we have no enforceable Bill of Rights. Like, for example, at the moment, it's a parliamentary sovereign dictatorship, which means that 51% of the voters can vote at one point to just take away the rights of the other 49%. Just like that. No problems, no questions asked. And what Mark Passio, G. Edward Griffin, and Dr. Rima Labo have stressed on this show in discussion about the Advanced New Zealand Public Party is that we would be more likely to benefit from establishing a protectorate and a proper constitution that can never be overridden. And that means that 99% of people cannot even override the rights of the other 1%.
Yeah, I think a constitution is a good idea. The UK, of course, does not have a constitution either. Israel doesn't have a constitution, and look where that's gone. And here in the United States, our constitution may not be respected, but to a certain extent, the sort of visceral cultural memory, or we might even say the vestigial cultural memory of once having had a Bill of Rights that really meant something, still informs the political culture here. So the thought of somebody being imprisoned simply for thought crime, pure and simple, people who have heretical ideas about World War II, for example, who get locked up in droves in Germany and France and other European countries, we'll never see that here. Yeah, sure, the Americans would, collaborate with those witch hunters and grab the heretics, and if they can come up with a pretext like they did to Ernst Zundel, but they will not be, say, locking me up for being well known on saying that 9/11 was a false flag. They just you can't do that. And having that Bill of Rights, I think, is a really important thing. And I think that here in the United States, we need to respect our Bill of Rights even more than we do. And it needs to apply to the public square, including the new public square. I mean, it does apply to the public square, but the new public square is the internet and social media. And right now, we've allowed social media monopolies to kill people's free speech, to banish people and kick them off, even for protected speech. That is speech that the courts would rule or have ruled is protected by the Bill of Rights, and specifically the First Amendment protecting freedom of speech. And so we have that First Amendment. It has done many good things. The overall history of jurisprudence on the First Amendment here in the United States, especially with freedom of speech, is actually pretty good and pretty admirable. And that's what should be followed with the internet. Like, if you want to throw somebody off Facebook, you need to show that they have engaged in non-protected speech, like they've libeled somebody, for instance, or they've committed incitement. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater, or it's pornographic or even blasphemous. There are these categories that are not protected speech, and there's a really good tradition of jurisprudence around our First Amendment here in the United States, and that's something I'm actually proud of as a U.S. American. And there aren't a whole lot of things to be proud of as a U.S. American, but that is one to be proud of. And so, yeah, I think that if I were in New Zealand, I would say, yeah, let's have a constitution, and let's have a constitution that includes a Bill of Rights that protects things like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, many of the things that are protected here in the U.S. American Constitution. So maybe you can call me a cultural colonizer, but I do think that those aspects of our First Amendment here are really good and perhaps of some universal validity.
Universal validity. I like those words together, because it means that it doesn't matter whether or not it was there in the beginning of the universe or is there at the end of the universe, it still holds true. And incidentally, the New Zealand Parliament is now introducing a bill to give direct internet censorship control to the New Zealand government, as if the multinational corporations like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube weren't doing that already. I have a warning on my channel from March 16th, 2019, and they will never remove that warning from my channel. And if I break one rule and these are all made-up rules that have no definitions whatsoever. They can literally, that's a breaking of the rule. Any point of this broadcast could be seen technically by YouTube as breaking a rule. That's how vague their terms are at the moment. Now, if I do break one more rule, that's it. I won't be able to upload, I won't be able to live stream. This channel basically goes away. And so if we're talking about the government, in addition to the multinational corporations having censorship capacity that they are using in a, what would you say, selected enforcement manner, against people who tell the truth rather than actually genuinely going out after horrible people. Like, for example, in the same vein that YouTube made it against their rules to swear on the platform to a large degree, Eminem was still monetized despite the fact that his music had bucket loads of profanity in it and anti-gay rhetoric and things of that nature. So it's the selective enforcement that is difficult, and it's true what you say that there needs to be some kind of an internet bill of freedom of speech and rights that is in fact enforceable, that cannot be taken away by either government or corporation. Now, moving on from that, I was just thinking about this concept of consideration and fraud. And consideration means, for those of you who are unaware, it's a banking term. So when I go to the bank and I ask to borrow $1 million, and the bank grabs $1 million out of its vault and then gives it to me, that's not fraud. But if I go to a bank and ask for $1 million and they get me to sign my signature on a piece of paper and they create the money out of thin air on a computer, they don't actually stand to lose anything. That's fraud because there's no consideration there, okay? And I believe that the entire world's banking system at the moment is based on complete and utter fraud, and my personal solution to that would be going back to the biblical term Jubilee. Are you familiar with this term?
Oh, yes, and I'm all for that.
And moving on from that, 9/11, and you called the term, it's very difficult to even use the term that rhymes with old slag in this political climate to a large degree, because that's the reason why a lot of people think that I believe that the Christchurch Mosque massacre was a completely genuine attack and believe the official story, because I was forced by YouTube to remove all of my videos that called it what it was.
Wow. Well, I haven't looked closely at that, so probably it's a good thing for you that I can't offer an opinion.
Well,
because I'll probably nuke your channel if I did.
If I may, I have read this out on air before, and we're about half an hour in. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, this is a listener-supported broadcast, so it only exists because you support it. So if you want to go to the VinnyEastwoodShow.com or donate through KiwiBank, PayPal, or Patreon, the links are in the description. But I've got a bunch of bullet points here that I've kept, and the list of all the stuff, it's quite extraordinary. So Brenton Tarrant, an Australian citizen, this may take a minute, Kevin, I apologise, an Australian citizen, not a New Zealander, claims he got money from BitConnect, which he used to travel, although there is no evidence to substantiate this claim except his word. The Guardian quoted that the ABC claimed Brenton earned money from BitConnect, except there's no mention of BitConnect in the article they linked. With this alleged money from unconfirmed sources, Tarrant travels to multiple areas around the world, but his first stop was Israel, where he stayed only 9 days out of his 3 months Israeli visa. Israeli officials gave no further details. The Australian Embassy and New Zealand Consulate did not respond to requests for comment either. After Tarrant came to New Zealand, he claims to have spent 2 years planning the attack and was scoping out the mosques in Christchurch for 3 months before the shooting. He obtained his gun licence in 2017 after a police visit where Tarrant gave the names of 2 New Zealand residents whom are alleged to have never met Tarrant but instead met him on sites such as 4chan and 8chan ban, but that allegation cannot be confirmed as police refused to comment. Immediately buying firearms, Tarrant's behaviour and rants was noted by a fellow gun club member who reported him to police, and nothing was done about it. Just before the attacks in 2019, the Crisis X Terrorism Conference was kicking off, bringing in the best crisis management delegates from around the world, including a, quote, highly realistic simulation. Immediately preceding the attack, Facebook went down for 48 hours worldwide. And then the very first live stream that went on Facebook and became viral was, of course, the Brenton Tarrant shooting. On the day of the attacks, there were drills being conducted by the New Zealand Police Armed Offenders Squad, and the Prime Minister was quoted as saying somebody in armed offenders uniform entered the mosque and started opening fire. There was also a sniper drill with foreign NATO troops on New Zealand soil, and they were even given shoot-to-kill orders on the day. After the attacks, the manifesto that Brenton Tarrant had released, claiming that his ideal model for the world was the communist Chinese model, the government made his manifesto illegal to view. The video with the evidence of the shooting also became illegal to view, both punishable by up to 10 years in prison for a single offence, including even just encouraging other people to watch it. This goes against the New Zealand Human Rights Act, which states that you have the right to act on or share any information in any form, whereas people who have shared the video were visited by armed police who pointed guns at their children's heads. Journalists reporting on this story, this is me, was visited by police 5 times in 1 week after the incident, and internet censorship became very prominent as the algorithms before this attack were already ready to go, and I was censored in the middle of a live stream that I was doing with Ole Damagard, a world expert in false flags. Now, also, you couldn't put the words false flag in the title of your video without it getting a strike and being removed. Conspiracy theories alleging fake guns or digital fakery, or that there were no deaths, started circulating around the international conspiracy media. Then the government decided that the government inquiry into the attacks would be sealed secret, so that the people would not be able to know any of the details of the inquiry. The gunman himself, after being arrested, pled not guilty and then flashed a Masonic 666 hand sign to the newspapers. A gun ban was introduced and implemented 14 days after the shooting. During the COVID-19 lockdown in March 2020, on day 1 of the lockdown, Brenton Tarrant pled guilty, and the government calls off any and all investigations into the Christchurch mosque massacre. No Royal Commission, no inquiries, case closed. And there you go.
Well, that sounds extremely suspicious indeed. And we do know that there is a strategy of tension going on. The term strategy of tension was made well known by a convicted Operation Gladio operative who was convicted of carrying out terrorist attacks in Italy under the direction of NATO and ultimately the American Pentagon. These were right-wing extremists posing as left-wing extremists, but actually carrying out their terrorism on behalf of the American Pentagon. And it was all designed, as this convicted terrorist explained, to try to scare people. That is, to you have to attack these people with no skin in any political game, the whole population to run to the government for protection. And we've seen this kind of strategy of tension over and over and over. And in the case of the Christchurch shooting story, that, of course, has a couple of benefits to the people who are pushing the strategy of tension. One is that it builds up this white nationalist extremist Islamophobe threat. More subtly, it
See, sorry, Kevin, you're starting to break up a little bit. You're starting to break up a little bit, Kevin. If you might want to just hang up quickly and ring back, or actually, I'll just quickly hang up on you and
call right back. Okay, here we go.
Cool, no problem. All right, and here should be a call back. There we go. All right, Kevin, you're back. So sorry about that. You'll have to start your whole spiel over again, because as soon as we started mentioning false flag in a and again, isn't that a little bit suspicious? Sorry, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was just trying to explain the story that you laid out was very suspicious. And I was talking about the strategy of tension, which is a concept
says poor connection here.
Made famous by attacks. Still bad connection? Okay.
Keep going, though. We can get a few words here or there.
Okay, I was trying to talk about Operation Gladio, the American Pentagon's false flag terror program for creating fake leftist terrorism during the Cold War in Europe. And one of the men convicted of terrorism during Operation Gladio explained that you had to attack children, women, civilians, people who were not part of the political game. And the purpose was to terrorize them into running to the government for protection. So a strategy of tension is a strategy of terrorizing the public for a political purpose and creating tensions, political tensions. And here, this Christchurch massacre is contributing to building up the supposed right-wing populist threat. And it's also being used to terrorize Muslims. And I think real Islam is a threat to the powers that be, because it is clinging to its position against riba, or lending it interest. So there are almost 2 billion Muslims in the world, and if they follow their faith, they have to completely reject all forms of modern banking, all forms of lending it interest, and they have to strive in a war against the bankers. The one thing that all Muslims have to be part of a war on, the one real military jihad, is the war against interest, or riba. And in the Quran, it says very specifically to put all usurers on notice that they will be the targets of a war by God and his prophet. And of course, by extension, the Prophet's community, that is all Muslims. All Muslims, to be real Muslims, have to be at war with usury banking and usury bankers. So Islam is very dangerous. That's why Islam was set up with the 9/11 false flag to take the blame. That's why there's been a war on Islam ever since 9/11. And the global Muslim community, especially in the West, has been terrorized into silence, terrorized into not standing up against the usury bankers and this New World Order. So this shooting in New Zealand, if indeed it were a false flag, again, I don't know if it was or not, would have served those kinds of objectives.
Yeah, it seems to me that if you... What was it somebody said? It was a psychologist, and they interviewed people who were abused by narcissists for a significant period of time. And she said after a while, you began to know what the victim was going to say before they even said it. She said it was like reading the trail, like a hunter or something of that nature, and that you could figure things out by instinct if you've got enough experience in this. And I felt a very similar vein after studying these false flag attacks for a decade when Christchurch happened, and it just seemed like a similar trail to me. Now, we had a mention in the chat room about anybody who's got some credible information about electromagnetic frequency radiation, and I would ask you to go to my channel and look up Paul Waddell, W-A-D-D-E-L-L, Paul Waddell, or just search EMF or EMR on the channel to get some really good information on that, because let's face it, facts right here, ladies and gentlemen, I am surrounded by EMF producing technology as we speak, and I really don't like the fact, and I have got everything as hardwired as I can to reduce my radiation exposure, but I can't control all the Wi-Fi in all of the houses around me. I can't control the 5G coming from the lampposts in the street, that kind of thing. And about 3% of the population is what's known as electrosensitive. Where are they going to live in a new world order, you know?
Well, my cousin is electrosensitive, and she lives in West Virginia. They call it a white zone in the state of West Virginia, where, because there's an astronomy or an astronomical observatory, they have dictated that there are no radio towers and cell towers, and all of this EMF generating equipment is banned from that area. And so a lot of electrosensitive people have moved to that white zone in West Virginia. But you're right, Vinny, there are going to be enough white zones for all of the electrosensitives. 3% of the global population approaching 8 billion. That's a lot of people. Where are they all going to live?
Well, I'm pretty sure Black Lives Matter would have something to say about those white zones. I mean, I recall them defacing a Civil War monument that was erected to the first black regiment of the North, right, who wanted to free the slaves and things of that nature, and then Black Lives Matter defaced it. So these are not the smartest cookies in the box, I'm afraid.
Well, yeah, something like that happened right here in Madison, Wisconsin. There's a statue honoring a fanatical anti-slavery activist and militia leader, and I mean, I agree, this guy's a hero. I mean, I'm against slavery. I think it's cool that this guy was honored with a statue because he had helped slaves escape. He had worked on the Underground Railroad, and he had a militia that would go and fight the slave catcher militias. And then he ended up volunteering in the Civil War and died in the Civil War, and they built a big statue to honor him. You know, great anti-slavery hero, right? Well, the BLM activist tore down his statue. Maybe they just saw it had something to do with the Civil War. And, you know, as you say, these people are not exactly PhD history students.
However, the tradecraft that's being employed by the people at the heads of this organization suggests that they're not a genuine movement of ordinary people, but in fact what's the term? A stalking horse?
Yeah, I think so. It really struck me as weird, Vinny. And I mean, sometimes there really are coincidences, right? Sometimes a cigar really is a cigar. It's not always a conspiracy. But, you know, it was pretty strange that we got locked down, and then virtually the day the lockdown ended, and you know, we've been paralyzed with fear about this horrible COVID disease. You know, if it gets you, you can't breathe. You turn blue, right? I can't breathe, and so suddenly George Floyd happens, and you suddenly have crowds of people in the streets chanting, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." You know, and this knee on the neck thing becomes the big icon. It's the new version of the crucifixion. It's all very, very strange. And the taking a knee for George Floyd, it mimics a Masonic ritual in which I think it's the third degree, the proverbial third degree. When they give you the third degree, they initiate you into, it's a very, very hard part of a Masonic initiation. They terrorize you, and, you know, I think that's maybe a mock execution or something. And as part of that, you take a knee. Everybody, all the Freemasons take a knee in memory of Hiram the Builder of the Temple, who was unjustly murdered. So now they've got everybody taking a knee, it really looks like mass mind control. It's very strange. Sure, it could be a coincidence, but it sure looks to me like the George Floyd post-COVID black versus white race hysteria thing is specifically designed to distract people from the fact that COVID obviously was made in a lab. The details are sketchy. We don't know for sure whose lab, although it looks like the University of North Carolina patented COVID-19 in 2015. And then it looks like probably the Wuhan lab in China was set up to take the blame by whoever really did this, which probably would be the usual suspects, that is the banksters and the NATO types that they own. And it looks like a global reset. But we're not supposed to notice that, and we have to be maintained in total mass hysteria. And they need to divide us and conquer us and get us fighting with each other. So they want the blacks to fight with the whites. They don't want everybody to unite and look at the banksters who are not just stealing from us, but now launching artificial diseases at us in order to terrorize us.
Now, also, let's say the disease is really dangerous and threatening and spreads from person to person like some kind of a plague. How many Black Lives Matter protesters have died of the disease since these protests began exactly?
Yeah. Now, isn't that strange, the way the mainstream media essentially encouraged these protests? This threw me for a loop, Vinny, because I'm actually pretty sympathetic to BLM. I was brutally abused by police once, and it really pissed me off. And if people dig deep enough, they can find my my essay about how I almost blew up the SFPD related to that incident. And so I participated in the Rodney King protests. I've always supported the Black Lives Matter thing and the movement to try to hold police accountable and to stop these insane, bully, psycho, murdering, abusing cops who run rampant here in the United States. There are a minority of cops, but the majority covers up for them. The majority of police here in the United States adhere to the Code Blue or whatever they call it. They have a code of silence. They won't talk about these things. And so I support Black Lives Matter in terms of the basic issues involved, but it sure does look like this has been hijacked by the establishment. That is, it used to be that you didn't see this kind of favorable coverage for this or any other protest movement, but now the mainstream media is doing everything it can to hype this and to get people out on the streets and tell you, oh no, you don't even need to worry about COVID. So these huge throngs of protesters are out there, and maybe they're getting a little tut-tut. Maybe you should social distance. And I wrote a parody of this, an edict from the mayor of Minneapolis, ostensibly telling the protesters to stay at least 6 feet away from each other and wear masks as they overturn police cars and burn businesses. But my parody wasn't very different from reality. The mainstream media is almost that crazy these days. So something very strange is going on when the mainstream media is whipping up this kind of extreme protest movement. And again, I think it's a distraction. I think they want a black versus white conflict. It's just like they want the right winger versus the Muslim conflict. They want these distracting conflicts. They wanted the world wars, the Axis versus the Allies. They love conflict, and then they play both sides off, and then they end up winning and robbing everybody, and nobody gets it because everybody's fighting the wrong enemy.
It reminds me of a George Carlin clip that Danny Romero from American Freedom Radio was playing on the in the ad breaks, that the elite will force us to keep us fighting with each other so that they can keep going to the bank. Race, religion, sexuality, jobs, education, that kind of thing, as whatever they can do to keep us fighting with each other.
Absolutely. And this race thing really is like that. Yeah, I'm sure there's racism, and people, there are ethnic affinities. People band together with their ethnicity against other ethnicities to a certain extent. That's a natural phenomenon. And of course, Europeans have conquered and brutalized the world, over the past few centuries. Yeah, these things are all true, but how relevant really are they to ordinary life today? The average person, black, white, green, yellow, purple, what have you, has a lot more in common with somebody in roughly the same sort of income bracket and education bracket and so on, regardless of their ethnicity, than they do with somebody who's in a totally different social category, like the billionaires, for example. So it's easier for the billionaires if we're fighting people who are like us, but who have a different maybe skin color or ethnicity or religion or ideology, anything to stir up distraction and conflict that can be milked for profit and for power.
That's right. I mean, my personal belief is there's only one race. It's the human race. And if you don't believe that, it's because you're racist. And in general, the main differences that we have with each other are cultural, because whatever cult we grow up in, those will be the beliefs that we adopt. And cults are often insular and see anybody else who's not part of the cult as inferior and the enemy. My very special guest, ladies and gentlemen, has been Dr. Kevin Barrett. TruthJihadRadio.com is his website. I'd like to thank you for your time.
TruthJihad.com.
TruthJihad.com, that's right. And I'd like you to also elucidate on this as well in the final minute that we've got here, to do a little bit of self-plugging, but also people don't know that the dominant religion in the world right now amongst the power elite isn't Christianity, it isn't Islam, it is Satanism, a love affair with the self. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. You can look at it from different perspectives. You can trace this back to Shabtai Zvi, the first Zionist, who was also basically a Satanist, a rebel against God, who taught the inversion of the Ten Commandments. He said, "Thou shalt kill, thou shalt commit adultery," and so that was his favorite one, actually. And so that became a cult that ostensibly some of the European banking elite joined in a couple of centuries ago. And so there really is a satanic cult out there. And the Skull and Bones Secret Society at Yale is obviously satanic. Their initiation ritual is masturbating in a coffin in front of all the other bonesmen and getting initiated. So there is real Satanism, and there are satanic cults in the United States. I've actually had brushes with a couple of satanic cults right here in the United States. They exist. They're real. And they have tentacles up into the elites, and they use that freedom from ordinary human morality to justify their psychopathy. So, yeah, we're ruled by Satanists.
And now, finally, Kevin, I'd like you to just plug your wares for just a moment. This show's kind of like a bathtub. Doesn't work without a plug.
All right. Yeah. So, just go to truthjihad.com. Check out the radio show link. Watch False Flag Weekly News, which you have co-hosted, Vinny, and I hope to get you back to do it again sometime, where we cover the news of the week from the kind of perspective that your audience would be familiar with.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Kevin Barrett, truthjihad.com. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise.
Well, thank you, Vinny, and good luck, and God bless, and may the public party of New Zealand ride to victory. Now,
just before we go, I'd like to share my screen with you and show you the 10 seconds of cute baby smiles.
My mama loves us. Daddy loves us so much because he's just so
that's
cute. All right, that's enough. That's enough.
Love it.
That's the thing. Eh? Babies are just so cute. Eh? They're ridiculous.
Oh yeah.
And you have to protect them as well, because they're innocent. They don't know what Satanism is yet, and that's why you've got to protect them from it. And that's what this fight is about, ladies and gentlemen. It's not about me. It's not about you. It isn't necessarily even about my little girl or your babies or your grandchildren. It's for those who have yet to be born, because at the moment we have a choice about standing up for freedom. We have a choice about standing up for sovereignty. They don't. And if we do not make the necessary self-sacrificing decisions right now for them, they won't have a future. Thank you very much for your time, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Kevin, and we will see you again sometime.
Okay, inshallah. Thanks, Vinny.
Dr. Kevin Barrett, ladies and gentlemen, truthjihad.com. Now, bear in mind that this is a listener-supported broadcast, so if you would like to start up an automatic payment to help me out, ladies and gentlemen, I'd very much appreciate that. You can go to the VinnyEastwoodShow.com. That's Vinny with a Y because it's the most important question. And Eastwood, like, go ahead, make my news. And you can support us through the PayPal email, which is guerrillamedia77@gmail.com, and all the links to that are in the description of this video. Just scroll down. And I would also like to mention American Freedom Radio. No rules, no taboo topics, no fear. Oh, excuse me. No fear of doom, and they were the first network to give me a radio show, ladies and gentlemen. And no, I wasn't born in America, and I am a New Zealander, and I have been stuck here this whole time, ladies and gentlemen, and it had to be an American network that gave me the ability to do a radio show, and I'm very, very grateful for that. And Danny Romero, who runs that organization, there are links in the description as well to support them. And lastly as well, if you want to have a look at my band, Vinny and The Vendettas, there are links to that in the description as well. We've just released a music video called Luftwaffe Aloft. It's a little tongue-in-cheek and a whole lot of fun. And I want to just quickly as well just acknowledge the wonderful mods that we have in the chat room over here. We have Marley Pumpkin, Tanel 88 on the fence with Muzza as always, and Jimmy James, thank you so much, Tanel 88 and everybody else that's been moderating in the main channel there. And also I'd like to thank MJ over here in the New Zealand Public Party channel. And by the way, folks, if you could subscribe to the New Zealand Public Party channel, that would be really, really awesome, because we want to get that up. It's about 2,000 plus subscribers at the moment, but that needs to be around about the 100,000 mark, and we've got 48 days to do it, ladies and gentlemen. Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. Every single second that passes, we are getting closer to victory, ladies and gentlemen, and that is because of you sharing videos like this, giving us the likes, subscribing to the channels, and telling people about it in your own homes, in your own communities, because this information is not going to be broadcast into people's homes willy-nilly like the mainstream media is. So you have to be the support base, ladies and gentlemen. You have to contribute if we are going to win this thing. And as Schopenhauer said, first the truth is ridiculed, then it is violently opposed, and then it is accepted as being self-evident. And as Gandhi said, first they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. Ladies and gentlemen, we can win. Thank you very much for listening to the Vinny Eastwood Show. I'm not a credible journalist. I'm an incredible journalist.